This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alix Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been in U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alix Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
On today's Bloomberg Intelligence show, we dig inside the big business stories impacting Wall Street and the global markets.
Each and every week, we provide in-depth research and data on some of the 2,000 companies and 130 industries our analysts cover worldwide.
Today, we'll look at how AI and satellite data are redefining weather forecasting.
Plus, June is Pride Month, and we'll highlight past segments on topics related to equality.
But first, we begin with the energy sector.
We recently looked at the company Invenergy. Invenergy develops, builds, owns, and operates power generation and energy storage projects in the Americas, Europe, and Asia.
The company recently announced the successful commissioning of a solar energy plant in Ohio, which will be run under a power purchase agreement with Microsoft.
And back in December, Meta Platforms announced it signed 4 contracts with Invenergy for 760 megawatts of clean energy.
For more on Invenergy and the challenges it's facing, we were joined by the company's founder and CEO, Michael Polsky.
We first asked Michael just how hard it is to get agreements with hyperscalers right now.
These are large-scale agreements, so it's not easy to just walk in, and these are those big deals. So, first of all, we have to make sure that both sides, so that we agree on that, suppliers have sufficient supplies and satisfy buyer requirements. Is what is also important that certain reliability standards are being met, and most importantly, the pricing has to be appropriate for a buyer to agree to buy this.
Michael, is the Trump administration making your business, the development of your business, the expansion of your business easier, more difficult, no real impact yet? What have you seen?
Clearly, the administration sent very right sign. President announced energy emergency, which I believe there is an energy emergency because we have to build, there is increased demand and we have to build more supplies, and more supplies we have to build. If we build like we used to do it, it would take too long. So it's really an emergency. So in Invenergy, we try to build as much supply as possible. What is also very important, not just supply, but transmission. I mean, one of our biggest developments right now, and what we believe is critical to meet sort of this emergency, is to build more transmission lines. I always like to say that, if we build more trucks without roads, we're not going to deliver goods. So in order for electrons to move, we need transmission lines. And if we have transmission, then we can shorten time to interconnect a facility. We have to be able to move power from where it's produced to where it's used. And I think we can really build infrastructure a lot faster here and with a lot more impact.
To your point, Goldman Sachs talking about how power is already tight in the Northeast. There was a report that said the development of data centers to the largest U.S. grid and PJM is raising costs by almost $10 billion because we just can't build it out fast enough. What's the biggest hurdle to reimagining transmission?
I think there are multiple. One is obviously permitting, because it takes forever permit, and
supposedly that's all going to be fixed now. Has that all been fixed?
I mean, it's in the process. Obviously, there are good announcements. We have to see, as a business, we have to see how it's going to be implemented, because implementation is very important. But it's not just permitting. I think transmission has to be appropriately paid for. And right now, particularly for long distance transmission, we don't have a methodology in this country how to pay for transmission. So there's a lot of intention to build, and the only really transmission being built, the one that recovered by utilities or RTOs through the ratepayer. The moment you touch something that is not typical and normal, then it's very difficult. So we have to really come up with appropriate methodology to value transmission and allocate the cost of transmission. I think, in my opinion, for this administration, for Department of Energy, that should be really one of the most important tests to build our infrastructure.
I did read the book, The Grid. So it took me a whole summer to get through it, and it was not an easy read, but I think I have some understanding of it. What's your sense overall of the power grid in the United States? How good is it? How bad is it? How much investment does it need?
Obviously, there are a lot of discussions about grid right now. The word being used like antiquated, old, not reliable, which is true in many ways, because most of our grid has been built 30, 40 years ago. And there are a lot of change since then. I mean, for example, we used to have very centralized way of generating electricity from very large coal, nuclear, sometimes gas power plants. Now we have a lot more decentralized generation, number one. Another issue is that our weather pattern has changed. I mean, now we have a lot more, inclement weather. We have ice storms, which we've seen in Texas. We have floods. We have other weather events, which shows that generation itself is susceptible. We cannot make 100% sort of guaranteed generation. So how to deal with this? We have to connect. I like to call larger geography, so power can move from here to there, just like roads, right? If we only go from here to there on one road, and that something happened with that road, and we cannot avoid that, then all the traffic will be stopped for days. We can't avoid this, so we have to have transmission. But
based on that, you said the sort of financing this transmission is key. How would that work? I get it for the regulated utilities. But if you wanted a transmission line across multiple states, how could the financing work to make sense for an independent player like you?
This is a fundamental problem here, right? We in the United States, we talk about the reliability, we talk about national security. But for example, we develop a large transmission line, and which dramatically increase reliability. But then you go to the RTOs like MISO and ask them to value reliability, and they just don't value this because neither they know how to do it or they simply don't want to do it. So this is a fundamental problem that, when you build transmission, for example, in our case, Grain Belt Express, it's $11 billion project. We have to have revenues in order to finance this. And if nobody wants to pay for anything, it's really hard. So I think it should be a priority for the government to really establish revenue streams for transmission.
Our thanks to Invenergy founder and CEO Michael Polsky.
Each week we look at research from Bloomberg NEF, previously known as New Energy Finance.
They're the team at Bloomberg that tracks and analyzes the energy transition from commodities to power, transport, industries, buildings, and agricultural sectors.
This week, we looked at BNEF's outlook for nuclear energy. Within the last month, President Donald Trump announced 4 executive orders aimed at revitalizing nuclear energy in the U.S.
For more, we spoke with Chris Gadomski, BNEF Lead Nuclear Analyst.
And we first asked Chris if the Trump administration's recent nuclear policies are actually going to work.
There's a big difference between policy push and market pull. Policy push is probably very, very effective for renewable technologies. But when you think about building nuclear power plants, that's a pretty substantial decision that the utility CEO has to make. And it's something that the hyperscalers are looking at very seriously. So you can set the stage for having these very favorable policy initiatives. But whether or not the utility executive who's only in charge, who's running the utility for only 7-8 years, decides, hey, I'll build a couple of large reactors, that's a pretty daunting thing for him to do, especially given the experience here where we spent $34 billion building 2.2 gigawatts of capacity in Georgia.
Do we need the big plants that we're all used to, or do we need this modular thing? That technology looks interesting to me.
It certainly is, and we'll probably see small modular reactors operating in Canada by the turn of the decade. I was going to say turn of the century, by the turn of the decade. And we'll probably see shortly thereafter some in Michigan as well, 300 megawatt reactors. The advantage of this is that to go from first of a kind cost to nth of a kind cost for small modular reactors, you need to sort of get some experience behind, just set up a manufacturing facilities, and sort of each one becomes progressively cheaper. And so it's much easier to do that with a small modular reactor than it is with a large reactor, because it's a very, very difficult decision, an onerous position for a utility executive to say, I'll build a very, very large capital improvement here that's going to take 7 to 10 years. So it's very daunting.
Which is why with the hyperscalers, that's a question mark, right? Because they need power yesterday. So they're not going to wait 7 years for a plant to be built. And that's like the good case scenario is 7 years, right?
For the large reactors, certainly. I mean, it took Vogtle 4 years of licensing and 10 years of construction.
Yeah.
So if you pair 25, 30% of that, the Department of Energy suggests 30% decline in the cost. Hopefully that'll reduce the time to construct. But I think that the way to go is the smaller modular reactors because they're more flexibility. Another big concern for hyperscalers is they want reliability. And large reactors, small reactors all have episodes occasionally. And if you have a 1,000 megawatt reactor, the size to what the Westinghouse AP1000, and you lose that, you're in a position you have to scramble to replace that power. If you have 3 or 4 300 megawatt reactors and one of them goes down for maintenance or so, it's easier to bridge that gap, 300. So it's an interesting dilemma that all the utilities, the hyperscalers are facing.
Is there any reason that the U.S. could not model what Canada's doing here? Is that just a regulatory issue?
Regulatory issue. The U.S. has the gold standard in nuclear regulations, and the Trump administration would like to sort of make it easier to license some of the reactors. And it's a very, very daunting thing when a company that NuScale is the only company that has licensed this technology of late. And they spent, according to the CEO, $500 million in the process. It took 44 months. Oof, that's a pretty big roadblock for these new vendors who are trying to introduce innovative technologies.
Okay. Could we see something like the SMRs, so the small modular reactors behind the meter at a hyperscaler? So basically not connected to the grid, its own small little SMR that's hooked up to like a meta facility.
There's a lot of discussion about doing that. One of the problems with nuclear reactors is that you need to have some sort of, it's preferable to be hooked to the grid. And one reason is safety is that in case something goes wrong, you need some source of power to keep the island cool. So that's something that's been kicked around. People are thinking about exploring that, but a large reactor of 300 megawatts plus is probably going to be connected to the grid. Some of the smaller reactors in the 50 to 100 megawatt may be a different story. But that issue about having access to the grid to cool it in case something goes wrong is important.
Our thanks to Chris Gadomski, BNEF Lead Nuclear Analyst.
Coming up, we'll look at the challenges faced by Black U.S. farmers.
You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence on Bloomberg Radio, providing in-depth research and data on 2,000 companies and 130 industries. You can access Bloomberg Intelligence via BI Go on the terminal. I'm Paul Sweeney.
And I'm Alix Steele, and this is Bloomberg.
Out here in the middle of all these acres, it can feel like you're the only person on Earth. And sometimes, that's how it feels when you're going through tough times. Trouble sleeping, your mind racing. So what do? We get help. There are people in our community who are here for us. Sometimes, just talking to someone can make all the difference in the world. Find more information at loveyourmindtoday.org. That's loveyourmindtoday.org. Brought to you by the Huntsman Mental Health Institute and the Ad Council.
This is the Bloomberg Green Report. Damage related to climate change cost the United States nearly $1 trillion over a 12-month period that ended May 1st. That is according to a Bloomberg Intelligence analysis. The spending represents 3% of the gross domestic product. Disaster recovery accounts for a big share of the climate change-related spending. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says the back-to-back hurricanes, Helene and Milton, caused $113 billion in damage. Add in another $65 billion for the Los Angeles wildfires. The report, titled The Climate Economy 2025 Outlook, says the biggest drivers of the trend in the U.S. are insurance premiums. They've doubled since 2017. Overall, increased climate costs from insurance premiums, power outages, disaster recovery, and uninsured damage are responsible for more than a third of U.S. GDP growth since 2000. Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Alix Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
We recently looked at the company Spire Global, which trades under NASDAQ ticker SPIR.
It's a space-powered data and analytics company that offers access to data sets and insights about Earth, oceans, and atmosphere.
We were recently joined by Spire Global CEO Theresa Condor, and she discussed how its AI and satellite data are redefining weather forecasting.
We first asked Theresa what the broad potential is for this kind of satellite market.
What is interesting about what we do, the satellites are very small, about the size of a loaf of bread.
Really?
Going around the Earth, very tiny, and they're packed with a bunch of different sensors. And those sensors collect, in our satellite case, radio frequency information that then lets us help customers make better decisions about what to do. So some examples of things are a collection of atmospheric weather data that then goes into weather forecasting that allows companies, utility companies, for example, make better decisions about how they should protect their grid in the event of extreme weather, such as a hurricane. In other cases, you can use satellite surveillance data and tracking around the aviation sector and aircraft to help have better efficient operations around airports and the movement of aircraft, and a whole host of other applications, including defense-related applications.
Who do you guys compete with?
So that's always a difficult question because we're present in multiple different markets. Whether you think of weather and climate, you think of aviation, you think of space reconnaissance. And so we'll have certain different competitors in each of those spaces. Since you mentioned Planet Lab earlier, I'll have to say that Planet is not usually a company that is considered a competitor because they're taking pictures, they're doing imaging.
Oh, interesting.
Versus what we do is this collection of electronic information and radio frequency data.
So you both send data to customers from your satellites, but the type of data and how you collect the data is then different.
Exactly, and the type of use cases and the relevance of it. So you'll have customers that want both types of data that are complementary.
What kind of stuff are you noticing right now? Like, what is some themes, some broad stuff that you're telling your customers?
So I think there's a lot of interest in defense and intelligence applications of satellites, and in particular the type of RF type of technology that we have. Naturally, this comes out of the current geopolitical situation. You have a lot of stuff going on in the United States right now, and at the same time, really since February, you've had rest of world governments looking at increasing their defense budgets, having less expectation of reliance on the United States to defend them in terms of crisis. So there's a lot of interest in how the rest of world can develop their capabilities.
Do you have customers around the world, or is it domestic U.S.?
We do. We have customers around the world.
Is the U.S. government a customer?
The U.S. government is also a customer.
Are they the big one, the lion's share, or are you guys pretty diversified?
We're actually quite diversified, both between commercial company customers as well as a government, and that can be civil agencies who buy our weather atmospheric data sets, and it can also be defense and intelligence, and that's U.S. and rest of world. So it's pretty well diversified.
Well, we've had companies ranging from McDonald's to, I don't know what, say AI is revolutionizing their business. How is AI impacting the satellite business?
So AI is also an important term and topic in the satellite sector. There's a couple of areas where we find it interesting. The first is in weather forecasting, where we're doing AI-based weather forecasting, specifically when we talk about sub-seasonal forecasts, so going 30, 45 days in the future, where normal forecasting models aren't usually very good. The other areas, or when it comes to satellites, are the processing of data and the ability to use AI to process them automatically and on orbit, so you don't have to download all the data sets, as well as in the operations of the constellation overall, because if you have many, many satellites in orbit in various orbital planes with lots of different sensors on them, having AI ability to manage that network is something quite interesting.
I was going to say, you also had a contract with Space Force, right? Did I read that right?
There is one that was just recently announced.
Space Force contract. How cool is that?
I know.
How easy is it to come to deals with contracts? I would think that your services are highly needed right now as companies are trying to figure out where to build stuff, for example, or how to allocate their supply chains.
So I think demand is very strong right now for both satellite data sets as it relates to climate or to better understanding increased weather variability. And there is also increasing demand, what I mentioned, on the defense and the intelligence side, and in particular, as more and more countries look to how they build out their own sovereign capabilities. Yep. And this is where we have the strength in building both in Europe as well as in the United States.
Our thanks to Spire Global CEO Theresa Condor.
June is Pride Month, so on Bloomberg Intelligence, we've been highlighting segments on topics related to equality.
In this segment, we spoke to John Boyd, founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association.
John discussed the challenges faced by black U.S. farmers, and we first asked him to break down what his organization does.
We offer technical assistance and outreach to 151,000 members in the United States. We've been around since the early 80s. and we were organized to help eradicate discrimination at government agencies and state and federal levels. And we've been doing this kind of work for a very, very long time. And I spearheaded the Black farmers lawsuits, one in settlement in 1999 and the other settlement on December 8th, 2010 by former President Barack Obama that paid out $1.25 billion to 20,000 Black farmers who face and experience discrimination at the hands of the United States Department of Agriculture. So we've been around a very, very long time.
So, John, how is that journey going? I mean, clearly it wasn't great when you started the association. What kind of grade would you give it now?
Well, I think we really went back decades here in progress with the administration. They came in and done away with anything that began with the word equity and diversity and justice, and eliminated those positions at the United States Department of Agriculture. And we still haven't received our $5 billion payout for discrimination, and also the land and federal inventory that I've been after for many, many years. And it was disheartening to learn that the administration was bringing white farmers in from South Africa, offering them a fast path to citizenship. And also we learned that they're going to offer these farmers land out of federal inventory that came from Black farmers, and land from the Department of Interior that came grazing land that was primarily leased to Native Americans. I was disheartened that the president said, although he was doing away with DEI or anything that was race related, and then brought in white farmers to the United States solely based on race. So he's saying he wants to have everything equal and do away with the race stuff, but then he brings in white farmers from South Africa and wants to offer them a fast path to citizenship, and I'm 110% opposed to it.
Well, John, it's also hard because being a farmer is hard in general, like hard enough.
Oh,
you're dealing with crops, you're dealing with weather, you're dealing with things completely out of your control, and then you layer this on top of it.
Hardest occupation known to man, people, is farming. And I could work 24 hours in a day and never catch up. And, we have to deal with the act of Mother Nature, like you said, floods and tornadoes and hurricanes and droughts. And this, believe it or not, is the first year in a very, very long time that I'm farming without a farm operating loan here in my own country, where the bank said and the government said, we're not going to extend credit to you because your input costs and the low prices due to the president's tariffs created some of the lowest prices in a very, very long time if you factor in the input costs and the low commodity costs. Wheat, $5 a bushel, corn, and $4 and something a bushel, and soybeans hovering around $10 a bushel, people. These are very, very low prices, and every time the president says the word tariffs, he scares the bejeebers out of the markets and the prices plummet. And, many Americans don't know that farmers are price takers. We're not price givers. So my price is based on the market that the president can plays with when he gets ready. It affects the very first people that voted for him overwhelmingly is farmers in this country. Are the very first population that's taken a black eye from the president because of these low prices that we just don't have any control over.
But do you think that grains, though, will be included in trade deals, which then in essence could help?
Well, I hope so. And, I like to equate it back to the president's first presidency. And I believe it was in 2018 where I was actually selling soybeans, almost $16.80 a bushel. And when the president imposed tariffs the first time on his presidency, the price plummeted because China basically stopped buying them, all the way down to $6 a bushel from $16.80. So we don't have anything to compare it to in a positive aspect. They didn't work the first time. And right now, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm in a very precarious situation. No farm operating loan, a shaky market, and for the future of agriculture right now, things are looking grim, people. We just don't have the new markets that the president said they were working to put in place. And, the ag department, instead of making things better, they're saying that they want to close offices. So the administration says that they're going to help farmers by payments, but they're closing farms.
Our thanks to John Boyd, founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association. Coming up on the program, a conversation on DEI with the CEO of Hispanic Association on corporate responsibility.
You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence on Bloomberg Radio, providing in-depth research and data on 2,000 companies and 130 industries. You can access Bloomberg Intelligence via BI Go on the terminal. I'm Paul Sweeney.
And I'm Alix Steele, and this is Bloomberg.
The latest global headlines are now at your fingertips.
Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now and get news when you want it on your schedule.
These are short audio reports that bring you the latest headlines with context.
Check in throughout the day for just a few minutes to stay on top of the latest news from around the world.
Bloomberg News Now is available 24 hours a day right on your smartphone.
Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen.
Bloomberg News Now. Context changes everything.
There's danger out there. It lurks on highways and quiet neighborhood streets. It's more likely to kill you than a shark and more terrifying than the biggest snake. Distracted driving claims lives every day. Every notification, swipe, social post, video, or selfie while driving risks your life. So while you might think public speaking or the zombie apocalypse is scary, what's really terrifying and even deadly is distracted driving. Eyes forward, don't drive distracted. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
With the Bloomberg Small Business Report, I'm John Tucker. Christopher Dipp is a Montreal-based engineer who's developed an app called Buy Beaver. It scans barcodes to tell consumers whether a product is Canadian. Dipp says it's the fastest-growing app he and his business partner have developed, garnering 35,000 downloads in just 2 weeks. His app's popularity reflects growing anger at Canada's biggest trading partner, the U.S., as President Donald Trump has threatened tariffs, made 51st state jabs, and referred to the country's prime minister as Governor Trudeau. Furious Canadian consumers have turned into vindictive shoppers. Experts warn this trend could have significant economic implications for U.S. businesses, big and small. In Canadian grocery stores, U.S.-grown produce is wilting on the shelves. Canadians are scaring wine lists over dinner to avoid ordering California wines, and more Canadians are canceling vacations to the U.S. And that's the Bloomberg Small Business Report.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney and Alix Steele on Bloomberg Radio.
June is Pride Month, so on Bloomberg Intelligence, we've been highlighting segments on topics related to equality.
In this segment, we looked at Bobbie, the only female-founded and mom-led organic infant formula company in the U.S. The industry has historically been dominated by male executives.
Laura Mow-di is the CEO and co-founder of Bobbie. Laura, a mother of four, was a high-powered executive at Airbnb before surprising everyone around her to leave her position for Bobbie.
We had the pleasure of speaking with Laura, and we first asked her about the biggest struggle right now in the baby formula industry.
The biggest struggle, I think, right now is, you all remember the infant formula shortage in 2022. There has been a very concentrated effort to make sure that we diversify and break up the concentrated market. And the only way to do that is to invest in more domestic manufacturing. I think the last time I spoke to you guys, I mentioned that we have co-created a bill that really allows and incentivizes more domestic manufacturing for infant formula. And right now, that is the number one focus.
The Infant Formula Made in America Act of 2025. Talk to us about that.
So again, like I said, this is on the back of the shortage. And what we recognized was nothing will change if nothing changes when it comes to the footprint of infant formula manufacturing. So this bill incentivizes new players to up-level and to break ground and build infant formula manufacturing here in the U.S.
How hard is it and how expensive is it?
It's very expensive. It's very expensive, but maybe nothing like other investments that are being made right now in manufacturing. It takes around 3 years, and it could be anywhere from $60 to $150 million to get a basic footprint in place, and sometimes even more. And given how long it takes to be able to get more manufacturing up and running, this is why we can't wait for another crisis. The investments have to happen now. And what this bill is, and it's finally gotten bipartisan support. I don't actually believe there's anything more bipartisan than investing in how our next generation is fed and building the resiliency of this market. I am just hoping that this bill gets introduced as something that gets passed sooner rather than later.
Just remind us, Laura, where do we source most of our infant formula these days?
Yeah, look, most of it is sourced domestically. But what we did do is that we allowed some international formulas, some foreign formulas, to come into the country on the back of the shortage. We essentially have imported our way out of a crisis, and that is still happening. So over the last few years, we've gone from less than 1% of infant formula being made and sourced in the US to now over 10% of American babies are relying on formula coming in from overseas. And the big push that I'm trying to have is high quality formula should be able to be sourced and made here in America for American babies.
Yes, but because it's expensive to, say, build the plants here, etc., can we get that at a price point where, like, you can stay in business and make money, but also it can be available to all different types of families?
The push I would have on that is it takes more than the private sector to be able to make that happen. And we're talking about infant formula. This is where we need something like this bill to be put in place to help bring down the costs. Because what they are is it's a production tax credit, which means that for every production run we make, there's tax credits given back so that we can bring those costs down. And it's really important that we make those investments today. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're waving the white flag as a country and saying, America's unable to do it. So we're going to allow other countries to feed our babies. Fast forward in 7-10 years, we could be in a much bigger crisis if we're relying on other countries to feed our babies.
Laura, just give us the latest updates for your company, Bobbie.
Well, we've been pushing a lot of innovation. I think the one thing we can't lose sight of is that the quality of infant formula deserves its utmost attention on an ongoing basis. So we recently launched the first USDA organic whole milk infant formula made at our facility in Ohio. And we're going to keep watching the way science evolves. And when the scientists say that there's new updates that need to happen, we're going to be making those changes to our product. And my entire focus as a mother is to keep innovating and up-leveling the nutritional requirements of formula for American babies.
Do you have a lot of competition right now?
There is competition. There is competition, and it's healthy competition because we need choice. And this is probably one of the only products in the market that doesn't have enough options. It doesn't have enough choice. And I believe I speak for many parents that when you walk down the formula aisle of a retailer today, it can often be an empty, sad, and lonely aisle. You're feeding your babies, and it shouldn't be. So I believe and I hope that with something like the domestic manufacturing bill, it actually introduces more competition. We need to see more Bobbies on shelf, and that competition will force all of us to up-level the standards.
Our thanks to Laura Mow-di, CEO and co-founder of Bobbie.
We continue with our June Pride Month conversations on topics related to equality.
In this segment, we spoke to Cid Wilson, the CEO of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility.
He discussed corporate responsibility and the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We began the conversation by asking Cid what his organization does.
The Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, we've been around for almost 40 years. Our mission is to advance Hispanic inclusion in corporate America. I've been in my CEO role for 11 years. And before that, I was 21 years on Wall Street. I was an equity research analyst.
Okay. So you're talking to your team here.
Yeah, he's reformed.
Yeah. So DEI in some ways is now a dirty word in corporations in the United States. How do you combat that?
Well, first you combat it with facts. The reality is that DEI is not a word. It's an acronym. It stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The opposite of that is homogeneity, inequality, and exclusion. So when we talk to companies, we talk about the facts that that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not only the right thing to do, it's also good business. Now, whether you call it diversity, equity, and inclusion, or do the work of it, you're seeing some of them that are continuing to find ways to do the work, staying under the Trump executive order radar, but recognizing that without diversity, equity, and inclusion, companies will have a very difficult time competing for customers, competing for talent, and competing to be the brand of choice.
This reminds me, the change in perception of DEI kind of reminds those of us on Global Wall Street of another kind of phenomenon, which was ESG and type of investment where you focus on environment, sustainability, governance, those types of things. That seems to, at least in this country, taken a back seat. How about rest of world? How does the rest of world think about diversity, DEI in general?
When you talk to leaders around the world, particularly in Europe, they feel that that what's happening in the U.S. is extremely unusual because they know that the path to a successful business or operation is through having a strong and robust and intentional diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative at all levels, especially the C-suite of the boards. Because remember that sometimes the argument against DEI is they claim that it compromises merit, which we know that is incorrect. What it does is it widens the scope for merit-based opportunities. Mm-hmm. The problem, though, is in the C-suite, as you know, if you're in the C-suite, you're not in the C-suite because you're qualified. You're in the C-suite because you're sponsored. And sponsorship still has implicit bias, and that's where you continue to see a lack of representation for women and people of color.
I mean, absolutely. How do we combat that at a time when federal policies, particularly on the education level, are getting rolled back?
So let me first address the education component, is that colleges and universities will still need to look for ways how they can attract diverse student bodies. No university is going to want to have let's say an all-white male student body and think that that's normal. It's not. And when you look at the pipeline into the workforce, particularly technology, whereas all of us know there is a shortage of workers going into those tech fields. And so with that, it means that you not only need to make sure that you're looking at what you need to hire, but also looking at even the immigration policies, because immigration policy that the current Trump administration has is completely counter to filling the jobs that are needed in the U.S. to help the economy grow.
Cid, maybe 30 seconds left. What's kind of the agenda for your organization over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, our agenda is to continue to talk to as many CEOs as possible. We're proud that we interact with more Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 CEOs than any other Hispanic organization in the whole country. And we know that those direct conversations make a big difference to give companies the guidance and understanding of how they can use diversity, equity, and inclusion in this current environment to not only navigate through this maze that they're having to address, but also how they can still win with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Our thanks to Cid Wilson, CEO of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility.
That's this week's edition of Bloomberg Intelligence on Bloomberg Radio, providing in-depth research and data on 2,000 companies and 130 industries.
And remember, you can access Bloomberg Intelligence through BI Go on the terminal. I'm Alix Steele.
And I'm Paul Sweeney. Stay with us. Today's top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now.